Dejan, and I'm representing Gertown. And I'm just overwhelmed at what I'm hearing this morning. And then I'm a little saddened because anybody know Gertown we've been struggling, trying to come back. I want to thank Mr. David Marcello from the law. I have not had a chance to meet you, but I've heard about you. And we've cried for help to so many people, so I'll probably be at your door next, crying for help. But I'm happy that Timberland mentioned this to me from NPN. She said, what you need in Gertown is a community agreement. That's fine. But when do you know when to get the community agreement? We are never notified as what's on the agenda. As someone said today, I think it was Mr. Bass who says, things been on the table 5 and 10 years back. When you hear about it, it's in place. And if you try to go in to do something, there's just no way you can even get in. We have several huge projects that's going on in Gertown. They'll come to you to use your stats to get the funding, but they don't involve you in a contract to implement what happens in your community. My story goes all the way back, you know, the environmental issues that we've been faced with in Gertown, and I just think that even from the city perspective, I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Gilchrist. I've never known about your office. And you have to have that, I hate to say the word political, but the political backing is the problem. Face on camera. If the politicians make the decisions as to what goes in your community, even down to zoning, you can go against the zoning from your community, but it has to be voted on the city council. How do you overlap that? I do want to become a part of it to find out more about it, on how we can survive. I think Gertown is a great place. It is now a cash cow because you come in and buy up everything and you throw it in and you can't, what do you have to say about it? Nothing. Yet we live there. And we deserve to have a piece of that be us. Not every plan that's designed is good for us. We know, how many, Columbia University did a study. We've had another university come do a study. We have study. Can we have implementation? You come to, and I don't really want to say, but I'm very hurt about this process because my community, I'm not going anywhere. I'm 75 years old. Where am I going? But I want a viable community. Am I wrong for that? My playground needs redoing. We need to get the cement plant out of there. We need to get another pool. It's like this community has been committing suicide to the residents. Somebody, I'm asking for help from somebody. How do I help to keep our community? Central City is a dream. It's a huge area. And when you don't have political clout in your community, it's hard to get anything implemented. Can I get somebody to say amen? Amen. So, I'm all for it, but I do know we're so small. Gertown is so small in comparison to the other communities. Make it a pilot program. Say what it was and what it is now, and the impact would be so great. It's less than seven blocks on each side, going back and forth from Xavier onto the other side. And help us to make that community be what it can be. We want to grow with the city. Can we? We'd love to. Just help us with the things that we have. We have a strategic plan. We have everything you need, but we cannot get it implemented. So I'm grateful you've given me a little hope that something will happen on this end. Thank you, just a comment. But I'm glad to hear about everything that you said, and I'd like to get a copy of your presentation on this whole program so that I can educate the people in my community.
Yes, I'll just mention that we are going to put the PowerPoint presentations up on the Public Law Center website. I imagine perhaps ULI may as well. But Hanifa Shabazz, I think, has a response to Reverend Dejan.
Yes, Reverend Dejan, I appreciate your passion. And you asked I don't know the political might, can you hear me? Okay. I didn't know the political might of your community, but the power that you have is in your vote. You said that you have representatives, and I'm speaking as an elected official, representatives that make decisions without your input. Your input is when you go to the ballot. And so maybe you have to just demonstrate to the elected official by your vote in the organization. The power of South Bridge was the fact that they was organized and we had a plan. And I want to give another example. Before we went into the CBA, the city of Wilmington was building its park and recreation facility in the South Bridge area, and they needed traffic flow, and they needed some other things that the community had to agree to. They had to bring it to, well, I demanded they bring it to the community's attention. And I think that was a first exercise to the community, their power, because the community said, no, we don't want it, we don't want it. And a lot of times we say, no, we don't want it, but we don't have anything in place to offer them for them to negotiate with. So we asked them, the officials, to leave the room, and I talked to the community to say, here is an opportunity for us to get some things that we want. Let's not just say no and walk away empty-handed. And they trusted me, and they used in their might, and they saw the power that they had, that they could dictate to the city what they wanted. And from then on, I think we kind of created a monster, and now we are here doing CBAs. But also, too, you know, when you said you don't have an elected official who's representing you, you have to maybe organize your community to use that power of the vote, and you can, as well as they got elected, you can also get them unelected. And then that community, anyone running to represent your community will see that they just are not a visual politician, but they're one who listens to the community and responds.
I just want to say one thing, too. And this is really building on what the council member said. One of the dynamics of change, I think, in this whole arrangement with community benefit agreements and developers is that you do think more as a negotiator. That as you were saying, council member, it's not just necessarily about saying no. I've been a public servant a long time, been in a lot of communities, and often, you know, it's just like, well, we just don't want that here. But it'd be good to keep the list of things that you do want. Just always make sure as a negotiator that you're really clear about those things and realize that one deal may not get you all of it, but it can certainly get you some of it. I mean, any progress that can be made. But it's really getting into negotiating mindset in terms of sitting across the table from somebody to try to pick those things off. And I will be very happy to chat with you afterward. Sure.
Bio district, already planned. We have been, when we heard about it, we went in to negotiate. We've been negotiating all our days. But, and it's not about the elected vote. We are a small community, so we can't move our council person out with a small community. It has to be, Central City is also part of my district, so you get my bit. So we can't move about. If you're doing here and somebody's supporting, I just think that Mary Jo, Sally Sue, Peter Sniper may not be a registered voter, but they are a citizen of New Orleans and they deserve to have their community done right. It should not be predicated on my vote. When you took that office, you took it off an oath to take care of the people in your district. And that has to happen. It's not just in the vote. It has to be the whole mindset.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Nick Harris, Executive Director of the Dillard University Community Development Corporation. And so I'm very happy that we had a number of discussions about it, and David came out, I guess about a month ago, to speak to a group of neighborhood leaders in the Gentilly area. And I'm glad, David, you did explain there is a definite difference between a citizen participation plan versus the program that we're speaking of today, which I think is very inclusive of the community because it's before these different activities can take place. I have to applaud the city council person because it starts at the top, the leadership, and I want to find out from Thomas and Nelson exactly, Nelson, when did you contact Thomas about your plans, and Nelson and Marvin, how did you integrate your plans into what Nelson wanted to do? But it's obvious that it started with the council person to bring the communities together, the community, and also with the developer. we are, and Reverend, I understand exactly what you're saying, and we all trying to work together, in this in New Orleans. We've been very successful in starting somewhat of a plan like this with Volunteers of America, with Victor Smell. I think Victor is in here somewhere. He was in here. But exactly when they wanted to renovate a building here in the Gentilly area, and how the neighborhood association was on the ground floor with that development and the things that we wanted to do together in a partnership. And it worked, and a very good plan. So I just wanted to find out between Nelson and Marvin, how did you all pull that together, and who contacted whom first?
The city of Wilmington has a practice when the developer wants to build in an area, he or she has to go first to the city, and what the city does is require that developer to go back to the community in which he or she wants to build and discuss his or her plan with the identified civic association, which is what happened with us. They came to our civic association meeting and presented what they wanted to do, and we moved forward from that point on.
And that was at a point in the development. I mean, we first knew that we wanted to be in the Wilmington, Delaware area for a piece of a site to do this. We then looked at any number of sites until we found and selected this particular piece of property. And it was that really was the trigger point. Then we had an agreement, a lease agreement with the property owner to use that site. And it was after then that we contacted the city, and we came to the community meeting and started the ball rolling.
Is that a city council ordinance, the council person, for that to happen? How's it enforced?
Well, it's enforced because when they said they came to the city, I was the representative for the city. I mean, they probably went to the mayor's administration, through the economic development office, and then economic development office advises me as the city council district representative. And then one of the practices we have, it's not an ordinance, no, it's just a practice that this particular council, members of this council, have put into, verbal agreement that anytime there's something come up in our district, that it has to go to the community first. And even during the zoning process, they asked there's a letter that goes out to residents in a certain mile radius and lets them know that particular area, there is someone petitioning for a variance. And so at that moment, because you're a property owner, you get written notification. All the property owners get written notification that a zoning hearing is about to take place, and that person wants to do whatever they want to do and requesting a variance. So at that time, the property owners can go to the hearing, as well as I as the city representative, but also our neighborhood planning councils, our state representatives, all of those who represent that area are notified of it. And then we can respond and has say at the public hearing. And the zoning board, which is they're not part of the city. Okay, then they make the decision based on the appeal as well as the public and city's position.
My name is Terry Wilkinson. I'm the Assistant Planning Director of Jefferson Parish, which is the county adjacent to New Orleans. I have two questions that deal with the minutia. One is, how is the Community Benefits Coalition formalized? In other words, what's the legal vehicle that gives it its legal weight to participate in this process? And the second question is, Ms. Shabazz, since the city was not a party to the CBA and wouldn't be in this type of agreement, what did the ordinance, because you said that there were ordinances involved in zoning or whatever, what did the ordinance do or say to reference the CBA? In other words, was it that those other approvals were contingent upon a successful CBA? What was the exact provision in the ordinance or ordinances that linked the city's approvals with the process.
But I have to do an ordinance to change the current zoning to what the new zoning would be that fits the developer's needs. And in the language of that legislation, it's stated that, along with it, that the city council is asking for this variance change, and also one of the clauses was that the fact that a community benefits agreement was made with the community and the developer. So it's not necessary that it has contingent upon it, it's just that it's inclusive in there that was done. It's all linked together, correct. Mhm.
One other thing.
Let me respond to the first part of that question, and that is what organizes the Community Benefits Coalition. The CBC is in some respects no different from the developer entity that comes to the table. It's a private sector enterprise. It can be organized formally. You could have an LLC or an LLP or a corporate enterprise, or informally. But there are a couple of practical devices on the Public Law Center website that community groups who are interested in the organizational side might want to consult. We have a Community Benefits Coalition operating agreement, which was derived from the Central City negotiation that we did some years ago. And there are CBC operating principles, which address themselves to some of the ethical aspects of how the CBC should conduct business. So on the practical side of organizing it, you can find those resources at the Public Law Center website.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on the council engagement, even though they're not parties, some councils in cities where CBAs are enforced have passed resolutions encouraging the conversation. And that may be sort of a feel-good thing, but it also puts the council on record that they, feel this is a good thing and can go that direction. But again, it's not contingent on particular terms or conditions of the agreement. You don't really go there. The other thing, I think, in terms of the organizations, the structures that David just mentioned, it's good if you have representatives that have longevity in the community. It's great if there are organizations that exist that either through their organization or representatives from the organization become part of that community benefits group, corporation, however it's pulled together. A lot of times, bad will can get started if it looks like a group just materialized out of nowhere around the opportunity to have this conversation with the developer. So you really want to make sure there's credibility and track record on the part of the community players in that conversation. And however that works in your particular community, that's really the way it needs to go.
The thing that I just want to repeat is the earlier advice to get prepared. When you've built your coalition, you really want to have everybody be in agreement on what you want, because one of the things that can undermine the process faster than anything is for the party with whom you're negotiating to get the notion that there's someone who's a part of your coalition with whom they can negotiate separately, or if there's someone in your coalition who wants something outside of what it is the group is asking for. So you really have to be clear that everybody's in one accord. Otherwise, you undermine your own process.
And further on the question of structural supports for this process, early notice doesn't have to be exclusively an expression of grace from the district council member, although that is immensely helpful. Early notice can be built into the zoning process. As an example, we are currently redoing our comprehensive zoning ordinance. This will be about the fourth or fifth attempt over the last 30 years to get a new document out there. I'm very hopeful it will cross the finish line this time. One part of the discussion about that new CZO ought to concern the sequence by which applicants for a major project bring it on to the Planning Commission. One might argue, I think with some persuasiveness, that before the application is filed with the Planning Commission, there ought to be widely disseminated public notice inviting responses from the community and insisting upon at least some effort to process those responses. It's never going to yield up complete agreement, but if we can get agreement on some things in advance, and if we can narrow the focus and identify the areas of disagreement before the application gets filed and the 120-day clock starts running in the Planning Commission process, that's a big help to all concerned.
It is. I was just going to say, in the city of Birmingham, the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Adjustment is there, and the council all require by practice that a development case have gone before a neighborhood meeting before they'll hear it at all. Now and again, that's not written in anywhere, but it's been the practice, I think, for almost 20 years or more in that city.
We on City Council just passed an ordinance and stating that our comprehensive plans be done every 5 years. They used to be done every 5, 10, maybe 20. We had some comprehensive plans for some communities that was over 10, 15 years old. So we just passed a law that that they be done and reviewed every 5 years. So I would encourage each one of you to get your comprehensive plan for your community to see where it is, what's planned for your community, and also know that you can put suggestions in for revisions when particular parts of the plan's time limits have reached, because they're not all, the different things happen different times within that 5-year span. So look to see what is planned for your neighborhood at what time, and be prepared. I have one neighborhood who they already rewrote the ordinance for me of how they want to change, because we had a big Blue Cross Blue Shield building, and they said whenever it's sold that they would never sell that building to go to be another corporate building or a condo, because it was such a problem with parking in their neighborhood. So they knew that it was time for the building was, that time period was up. They knew the building was up for sale, and so they were ahead of the game, and they rewrote the revision for me at what they wanted in their neighborhood. So really being proactive and knowing what's on the table in your comprehensive plan is vital.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alan Williams. I'm with Civic Center. We're a relatively new planning and design firm here in New Orleans. And my question is about something Mr. Marcello said earlier in the program about how CBAs provide value to developers. I'm wondering if you meant that in a sort of pro forma or balance sheet sort of sense. Are you suggesting that through community benefit agreements, developers can gain a degree of certainty in the regulatory hurdles or permit hurdles that they face that will actually affect the way their project pencils out, either through the shortening of construction terms or at some point in the financing process, securing financing for the project? Or is it more in a less financial sense that it provides value?
Well, thanks for the question. I think it's a real good one. I definitely think it's value in a financial sense. You know, you can pay me with my private lawyer hat on to battle it out on behalf of a well-heeled developer in trying to get the project done over the dead bodies of the neighborhood association. Or you can employ me pro bono through the Public Law Center to represent that community group in a collaborative process where you've genuinely got a developer on the other side of the table who wants to be responsive in that negotiation process. I'm wildly enthusiastic about the second strategy as opposed to paying me as a private attorney at inflated hourly rates. So I think there's money to be saved right there in terms of what developers have to do to get their projects approved. As I've also said earlier, I think there is value in the strengthening of the neighborhood around the project. You know, you don't want your house, your personal, perhaps largest investment as an individual, to be located in an area with declining property values. And I would say that most developers would prefer to have their projects located in areas that are uplifting rather than decreasing. So if you can contribute to the uplift of the surrounding neighborhood, that also has value on the bottom line.
Well, and so for that to really have value in the developer's mind, though, I would assume, though, that value would have to be recognized by the lender. Is that correct? I mean, for for them, they want their project to succeed, but in the sort of time frame that they're operating on, whether that's 5 or 7 or 10 years, and the pace at which neighborhood improvement takes place, they may not capture that value for themselves unless it translates on the lender side to a safer investment.
Well, Nelson Weidell's project did not need public financing, but many of them do. And getting that sort of commitment from the public sector entities is, again, I think, aided tremendously by having the support of neighborhood groups.
I see.
Well, it's also, at least the kinds of projects that I'm involved in, it's not unusual to spend $500,000 to $1 million in the development. It's also not unusual to spend $500,000 and be on the last lap and have a group of determined citizens to kill your project after you've spent that money. So a terrific investment in a project that you're determined to go forward in is to have neighborhood support early on, which gives you more assurance or confidence that you will have a successful project. So it's as simple as that. Second thing is that we are developing other projects now, Chicago, Massachusetts, Florida, et cetera. Those people are curious about who we are and how we will affect the neighborhood. So that if I want to grow my business and build more plants, I damn well better have a good relationship with the neighborhood and a successful community benefits agreement. So those are the real more tangible financial benefits rather than a lender saying, I'm going to give you this a better rate or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and just one other thing. I think it's important not to mix the apples and oranges. To some extent, what you're talking about is the transactional value of getting the case through at minimum cost, minimum must, minimum fuss, minimum payment to David for legal fees. But you also have a long-range accrual of value of the project that benefits from having the community around it stabilized. And that's almost an enhancement more than sort of working against the downside of the ledger. You're making a project then that is probably going to realize greater value than it would if you did not have these other benefits that are stabilizing the community around.
So if you'll allow me just one more add-on, I'm interested in this because I'm interested in how a community can quantify the benefits that they're going to bring to the developer and really speak convincingly about the value that they're going to provide. And I was, if there's any other way in which you could speak to that, how a community can communicate that value in a real kind of dollars and cents terms, then I would ask that you extrapolate on it. Thank you.
If I'm answering your question, if I get your last point, I think as a developer coming into a community after spending all the monies that they do would prefer to be in a neighborhood where they're looked at with a good eye than a negative eye, because you can have a successful bottom line, but if your press is constantly that big bear, that big elephant in the middle of our neighborhood and how they're adding pollutants to a neighborhood and they've come in and made all this money, they haven't done anything for us, those kind of things. I think you can make all the dollars you want, but if your marketing PR presentation to the community is negative, then that could cost you in the long run. I think it's to what Nelson was saying, he's trying to do more plants other places. So if somebody wants to come and just like you investigated and found us, and we came back and said, Nelson was the big bad wolf and he brought this stinky old plant into our neighborhood, didn't provide any jobs, he brought people outside, then another neighborhood would say, well, we don't want that type of corporate neighbor in our neighborhood. So I don't think you could put a dollar value on that.
Thank you very much.
Sylvia Sienna Richard, President of Eastern New Orleans Neighborhood Advisory Commission. About 3 years ago, we had a developer that was going to develop a very large structure in our area. And we became familiar with what we called at the time the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement. And we tried to initiate making demands on this developer to give us something back in return that we could use as some kind of deliverables to our community. Very difficult because They had the political backing to put the structure there, whether we had something to say about it or not. And at the very last moment, because of our persistence, it caused the community to be split because the structure they wanted to build, we needed. This is just after Katrina. So there was no doubt that we needed the development. But we certainly wanted to have some stated deliverables that we could say were going to happen, and there was nothing there, nothing to assure the community that we could depend on them delivering certain things to us and to our community. So we persisted and got some things added at the last minute before it was passed before the council. But our council representative voted against it because it was not clear enough, it was not precise enough or concise enough. And it passed anyway because she was overruled. So in those instances, you see, it's very frustrating because, and we were just getting into understanding how after Katrina, we could be a major part of what occurs in our community, and to make demands. Since you're going to be in our community, we need to live together, and we need to be such that both of us benefit from the relationship. So to have that happen, even in spite of making those demands, made it very frustrating for us. And I guess what I'm saying is, how do you ensure that what the community wants, the community gets? You know what I'm saying? Because we did all the right things. We sat down and got all this stuff together and presented to them. But because it seemed like it was already blessed, the development was already blessed, it was a fight to get it accepted.
Well, I suppose one response is there are no guarantees in this area. We're fighting to win what we can win. A second response is that was a weird time after Katrina, and I think we all ought to forgive ourselves for ambitions that fell a bit short. You know, this is about how we might go forward more effectively with community benefit agreements, and hopefully things have settled down a bit now in terms of the emotional trauma of Katrina, the political dislocations of it. You know, I'm frustrated as well that we spent what amounted to probably a year of effort with the Central City CBA negotiation and didn't ultimately have anything to show for it. But we learned a lot in that process. And today is more about learning than doing, but doing, I hope, lies not too far down the road.
Well, hopefully, I think we learned a lot too, and we do know how to get a little bit more out of the process. But it was a bit frustrating. Thank you.
There is one thing, though, that I would add that you may have already done. You may have done this. I just didn't hear you say it. But as we communicate with our own city council person, we also share our plans, our desires, things we don't like with the council members at large, so that we don't have a single leverage point, but we have as many leverage points as we can possibly have. And there have been maybe one or two instances where there might have been another council member who had some interest. I'm not talking about in these CBAs necessarily, but some interest in something that was of concern to us, that we actually shared information across the council so that everybody on the council was clear, especially in instances where we had like more than 100 people to sign on to something. Then we wanted to show that this is not just one or two people in one organization or another, but this really is across our whole community. This is how people feel. And in the instance of a development that happened since these two CBA opportunities, there was work done with another neighborhood organization to figure out how a development was going to impact them, as well as how you know, what the positive points were that we wanted in our neighborhood. So I just encourage us all to look for every leverage point we can.
That's a very good point. We did include the council at large people. We did not include the other areas because our organization is made up of about 40 different subdivisions in the eastern New Orleans area. But that's a good point, to reach out to other areas outside, other subdivisions outside that would be impacted as well.
And
That's a good idea.
I promise you that those developers talk to every single council person. They don't.
Oh, yeah, we
they
know
don't
that.
Just talk to yours.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, you're right.
Just to add to that, this may happen here, but our organization holds a regularly scheduled monthly meeting.
We do.
And our council and state political office holders are at those meetings. They may not make every one of them, but they make enough of them that they know what we want and where we're coming from.
We have that in place as well. And it wasn't so much that our council person did not support us. She didn't get the support from the others, and that caused the problem and the issue. Thank you very much for the comments.
Hi, I'm Miles Traplin. I am in the Mid-City area of New Orleans, and I have a question for Mr. Thomas and Mr. Wydell. I've been involved in neighborhood organizations most of my life, and one of the key problems in getting anything enforced is volunteer legal help. We have been trying to enter into some agreements on demolitions of property, which is a big problem, where a developer will want to, or even a single property owner will want to tear down a property with the promise of rebuilding. Our problem always comes down to is how do we enforce that agreement when we have, our neighborhood organization has no money. So my question to you is, for your neighborhood, the Southbridge neighborhood, was there an enforcement provision in there to where the corporation would actually provide payment of attorney's fees or would post a bond in the event that the hiring requirements were not met or the development requirements were not met in the neighborhood?
No, that was not in the agreement. The agreement did not call for any posting of a bond or anything of that sort. It was the legal document negotiated by a lawyer that spelled out the benefits of the community. And there were no requirements for the bond whatsoever.
Okay, so if the contract was breached, if the corporation didn't come in and do what they said they were going to do, particularly in hiring, what was the enforcement provision in the CBA to force the corporation to fulfill?
There are provisions in the CBA that if there is a breach of contract, there are procedures that were to be followed. Now, those procedures did not include a monetary penalty, but it did include a series of arbitration, but not a monetary penalty.
Okay. But then in terms of Southbridge, the community, y'all were on your own. So if y'all were not able to hire counsel, was there some provision in there to provide your neighborhood association with the legal assistance that you were needed?
The lawyer from Widener Law School was our legal representative, and he would continue to represent us as it relates to the CBA. So we didn't have to look for nor hire someone separate or in addition to him.
Okay.
Yeah, the actual agreement under enforcement, if there's a violation of the agreement, then there's a notification period, there's a 10-day cure period, and then it calls for mediation or arbitration, and then it's agreed that that injunctive relief by an arbitrator would, be bound by. I mean, I would say this, that depending on the circumstances, that a developer such as ourselves would be willing to put up a bond or some sort of security for the enforcement of certain provisions or for a community benefits agreement. And as Marvin and Hanifa have said, this agreement was put as part and parcel to the zoning variance that we got, because the city found a zoning law from the 1880s that forbade meat rendering in that particular heavy industrial area. And even though we're not rendering meat, we are taking some food products, including meat, that could be interpreted as rendering. So there was a zoning amendment made, which included this. This agreement is also in our state permit, so it has implications beyond just the agreement itself. It has implications on our relationship with the city, and we operate under the good grace and allowance of state law, and that's enforced by the environmental agency.
So permits could be withdrawn, is what you're saying?
Absolutely.
So if you would
Absolutely.
violate this community benefit agreement, the permits for you to operate as a business could actually be withdrawn.
If that happened,
Okay.
we'd be really in deep, deep trouble.
And again, I really want to encourage everybody, we've got to think expansively about each of these opportunities as they come along. This is not a one-size-fits-all. And in Columbia University's example, again, which is one I'm quasi-familiar with, they actually had, as part of their agreement with Columbia, donation to legal aid. They put $4 million in for legal assistance related to anything that might come out around this, and that was legal aid that the CBA group could tap into, the CBC. But that all comes down to what you can negotiate. I mean, how again, committed is the developer or the development interest to that project, where you can get them and say, okay, we need this, 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 and oh, by the way, how about some legal funds as well?
Okay.
So
Thank you very
that's all
much.
about the negotiation. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you so much to all of you for your contributions here today. Madame Shabazz, as you made your presentation, 2 words stuck out to me. One was empower and educate. And the whole point and purpose for this forum was to educate and thereby empower neighborhoods, developers, as well as elected political officials. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I want us all to keep in mind that this is an ongoing process. This is not a shot. It is a beginning step. I wanted to ask to both Nelson and Marvin, Mr. Thomas, and Mr. Wydell, first of all, were you familiar with CBAs prior to this negotiation? And specifically to you, Mr. Thomas, is the goal of your coalition to seek a CBA for all new developments in your area? And I think that's important so that communities understand that there's a tremendous amount of resources and a lot of time as well as finances that go into looking at that. And how do y'all get around to picking and choosing which cherry?
The answer to your first question, or last question first, yes, we do. I mentioned in the PowerPoint that we are developing a how-to manual with a website, and that will be used by the community to continue community development activities, CBA activities, and in our Special Area Management Plan, SAMP, which is a 25-year revitalization plan for community, it is in there that we will continue to develop CBAs. In reference to the first question, knowledge of CBAs prior to negotiation with Peninsula Compost, we were aware of CBAs by virtue of Rahima Jabbar Bey, who introduced us to Julian Gross. But I would not want this group to leave today under the impression that those folks from Delaware really are on the ball, know what they're doing, and didn't make any mistakes, because our first attempt at a CBA was a disaster. We were negotiating with one of the major developers in the state of Delaware. He wanted to build what we call a 15 retail shopping center in the community. The developer himself was never at the negotiations. It was his subordinates that we were dealing with. we wanted the CBA so bad that we just disregarded most of what Julian Gross had told us. And we agreed to support the developers' benefits before we got fully into negotiating what ours were going to be. The draft CBA that is still draft today allowed a joint decision on the type of retail that would go into the shopping center and the type that would not. The one stumbling block that created an overpass was Payday Loans. We were building our community, and we felt Payday Loans were predatory, and we didn't want it. Developer wanted it. The only time the developer was at the negotiation discussions with the coalition was the last time we met. He owns the property. He indicated that he wasn't going anywhere. We lived there. We emphatically told him, we're not going anywhere. So that CBA is drawing dusk on our shelves, and I guess his is in the trash. But what we learned from that effort helped us to develop the next CBA successfully, which was with Peninsula Compost.
And my partner Charlie and I each attended every negotiating session with Marvin, Ms. Bosworth, who's not here today, but were negotiating with us. I was not familiar with community benefit agreement as described, in this meeting, et cetera. But over the years that I've been developing environmental projects, we're very familiar with arrangements and agreements with community, generally through either city or a township or that sort of thing, that puts certain prohibitions on us. In some instances, we'll take their yard waste for free, or in another instance, the truck traffic, the odor, a variety of things like that. So, I mean, we've been interactive with a number of communities in crafting agreements that give them some safeguards, but this was our first exposure that Marvin gave us to actual community benefit agreement.
Thank you again for, I'm sorry.
Well, you asked, your last part of the question was, do we plan to use CBAs on other development in our neighborhood?
Yes.
Okay. You heard Mr. Thomas talk about the SAMP plan, the 20-year revitalization, 25-year revitalization plan. And I also mentioned in my presentation that South Bridge is the only area that has massive land for future development. Around us is the riverfront that's being developed. Okay, and so in order for us to take the SAMP plan off the paper and make it become a reality, we definitely plan to use that CBA tool to be able to get resources and things and help us to build the capacity that we need to be able to make that plan become a reality, because it's something that we want, and unless a private developer comes in and develops the things that we want for our neighborhood, that's the only way we can get it done. But we are trying to structure ourselves so that we also become our own CDC. We start doing some of the development, whether it's housing, bringing in businesses, and doing future community benefits agreements with other outside private developers will give us that leverage support that we need to make our SAMP plan become a reality.
And my last bit of editorial comment is that I'm encouraging all communities to go back and revisit your UNOP plans and decide for yourselves, are you on target, are you on track, and what are you going to do about it?
And one thing I would say too, I want to add to this is my last comment, that I mentioned we call ours comprehensive plan, but also building relationships with your planning department and building relationships with people in your economic development department. Because some things you'll get information and support and directive by them that you might not get from your particular council member.
I want to say mega amen to that, because the other thing too is, to the extent you can look at them as your partner, a lot of times developers are coming into the city wondering where they may put something. They can come in with a total blank slate except that they know they want a project and they like your city and your market. But they don't know which neighborhood to go, and they really don't have an idea. If your economic development department or executives know what your community is targeting, they can help even start that conversation saying, okay, this is a good part of town for this kind of project. Here's who you need to get with. So that communication is absolutely critical.
Our citizens have become citizen planners as a result of a catastrophe, and we already have learned a lot of things through the help of Stephen Bingler, Concordia, and others about that. But we may have thought about it as we got it done, but in fact, it was a first step.
David, I have to say one more thing. Once again, I have to say thank you again to the council person from Wilmington, and I think you take a dynamic leadership role in informing the citizens in your area about the steps in which they should take. And you know, the whole part about when David first mentioned to me about the plan, and we always had talks about it because so many buildings have gone up in the city of New Orleans without the developers even having one conversation with the people in the community, and building in these different communities without the same type of architectural look, without abiding by Section 3 regulations and hiring the people and having them being a part of it. Either or in your presentation you had that you really cannot build a development in the building and exclude the people from the community. And see, all of this is part of inclusion when you have a project. And I'm very passionate about it because I'm living here in Gentilly and see the developments going on without having the community as part of that initial discussion. And we're talking about before they even go and try to get the zoning permit, okay, but how you develop that. And then someone asked the question again about the attorneys and everything else. Many neighborhood associations do not have that type of money to afford for attorneys and everything, so we need that pro bono from whomever that can lend them to the neighborhood associations. Here at Dillard University, we offer our facilities to the community. We do the computers, the faxing, we do everything else for the people to help them to get to the point where they should be. And I have to applaud that, Mr. Gilchrist, it's my first time meeting you. You're very knowledgeable, and I hope that the comments you're making will resonate over to the people in the city of New Orleans, because I don't know if they know about that, okay? But you have made some very good statements, but they weren't about New Orleans, about what other cities, but what you're saying can definitely help our city council people. And David, I only hope that we can once again have a meeting like this, and to also to educate, to bring more people in from the community to talk about what you're speaking of, because I don't want this to get lost when we look at the master plan and the citizen participation plan, and which many people do not agree with, and based on what you're doing, because they're two different areas, okay? I prefer what we're speaking of here today because we're talking about the foundation, okay? Not after. So once again, I have to applaud you all for the work you've done and what you're doing in Central City. And hopefully that it will spill over, become contagious, that we can do in other parts of the city. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We've done a remarkable thing today. We brought this project in on time thanks to a well-mannered group of speakers who adhered to the time constraints that we imposed upon them. So I want to start my thanks with all of the speakers here, our 3 out-of-town speakers who traveled down to join us, and our 2 local resources. Thanks to everyone. Let me also thank and acknowledge a strong source of support that we had in our office at the Public Law Center, and that is Dan LaSalle, who has been on a pro bono internship with us for several months now. Thank you, Dan, for all of the work you've done. Thanks to ULI, thanks to Carrie Kessler, who has supplied us with the constant support and attention that this project needed. And she has been assisted in that process by a number of the volunteers who make ULI a successful enterprise locally. And thanks also Nick Harris and his colleagues here at Dillard, Michelle Matthew, who's responsible for maintaining this beautiful facility, and Mark Raymond, who has been back in the audiovisual room assisting us in getting the PowerPoints up and running. We hope that when CBAs begin to roll out on the ground, people will look back to this symposium and say, that was a rollout of sorts too. Thanks to all of you who've stayed the course with us. Thanks to the speakers, and onward and upward to more CBAs. Thanks.
Thank you very much.